But coming out of Isaiah 53, coming out of that fourth servant song, we get to see the hope that the Messiah and the future that the Messiah provides for this people who have been experiencing God's discipline, his judgment, who in many ways they've lost hope. They have a hard time seeing any future at all. How can we go forward when all of these things are happening, when all these judgments of the nations, of Babylon and things like that, for a nation in decline that's seen and experienced all of that, even the prospect of children was a hard thing for them to picture, of surviving into some future. So they needed a message of hope. They needed it then, and in many ways we still need it today. We need to be reminded of God's future. But even the prospect of children was hard for them to think of. It starts off in Isaiah 54:1. He says, "Sing, barren one who has not given birth. Burst into singing and shout, you who have not travailed. For more are the children of the desolate than the children of the married one." In the future, in the life and the redemption that's provided by the Messiah. So even the barren woman is going to have reason to sing and rejoice. And that's how Israel saw themselves in this moment. Israel has been hit. They've been hit pretty hard, or they're going to be hit pretty hard. They've already seen the northern kingdom gone. They're considered by the world, by themselves even, to be desolate. Shamim is the name. Is the word. It means appalled or stunned, where they're like deserted, deflowered, devastated, or ravaged. You look at all the different kind of words for that one. The Septuagint uses a word that says eremos, talking about, that's the Greek translation. It's talking about deserted places, talking about the wilderness. And when that's actually used about people, sometimes it's used in context of people. It's saying it's people who have been deserted or abandoned, like a woman neglected by her husband, or somebody who has no aid, no protection from others, not even their friends. Nobody acknowledges that they even know them. But it's talking about those deserted places, those wilderness kind of places. John the Baptist came out of the eremos, the wilderness. Yeshua was tempted in where? In the eremos, in the wilderness, for those 40 days. It's the place in the book of Revelation where the woman flees to get away from the attacks that are coming. But this is the situation. This here in 54:1, this woman who's considered to be cursed, who thinks of herself as having no future, not fulfilling her purpose. The Targums, those Aramaic translations, they identify the woman as Jerusalem. He says, "Sing, O Jerusalem, who was like a barren woman that beareth not. Rejoice with praise and be glad, who was like a woman that conceiveth not. For more shall be the children of Jerusalem that was laid desolate than of the inhabited city, saith the Lord." In other words, even though Jerusalem may have been cleaned out, may have been destroyed in many respects, a lot of the buildings, a lot of those things are empty, and the population is gone, there's still a future. Jerusalem is going to have in this future more then than it did even before. So this woman, symbolic of Israel, symbolic of Jerusalem, she has endured this great judgment. She is going to be blessed with many more children and a much better future than what they had before, and even maybe who haven't been through what she has, because suffering has provided that for the suffering servant from back in Isaiah 53, because he bore the sins of many, because he interceded for the transgressors, for Israel, for Jerusalem. She's going to have so much of a greater population, so many more children, so to speak, that she's going to have to call these guys you know, Chip and Joanna Gaines, for a fixer-upper type of episode to make room for all the people that to fill how many they have, right? In Isaiah 54 verse 2 it says, "Enlarge the place of your tent, stretch out your tabernacle curtains, do not hold back, lengthen your cords, strengthen your stakes." And so this woman, Jerusalem, is going to need, to knock out some walls because she's got to expand. To enlarge, that word is rahab. It's to grow wide or large. It's first used back in Genesis chapter 26 when Isaac, he gets in this quarreling match with the Philistines, with Abimelech, and he's digging some wells, and they keep coming and claiming, "No, we dug that one." So he moves to another place and digs another one, and they came over to him and then said, "No, no, 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 that's ours. We dug that one too." And the last one he digs, where he doesn't get an argument, he calls that one the wide spaces, because it's Adonai has made room for them. That's what this is kind of picturing back to. The second time is the Exodus 34, where God is promising to drive out the other nations from before them, to enlarge the Israelites' territory. So the family is going to be getting bigger. They have to be able to cover this larger area. They're going to have to provide protection to a greater number of people. Again, in the Septuagint, in that Greek translation, the word is platano, to make broad. And when it talks about that's the word for enlarge there. But when it talks about tent, it's a tent word. The word is ohel, which referring to like this nomadic, movable dwelling place. It's used back in Genesis 9:27, which is interesting because both those words in the Hebrew and in the Septuagint appear in in Genesis 9:27. It says, "May God enlarge," and in the Septuagint it's that platino word. "May God enlarge Japheth, and may he dwell in the tents, the ohel of Shem, and may Canaan be his slave." Okay, which is very interesting. Isaiah, when he is talking about this passage, when he is talking about this having to extend and expand the tents, he's referring to a concept that explains the mystery of the gospel, the mystery of the good news of how the nations are going to be brought into the family. The Jewish people are descendants of who? Of Shem, right? Many of the nations descend from Japheth. But they're going to be brought in and dwell in the tents of Shem. So again, this is the mystery of the good news, the mystery of the gospel, how they are blessed, how even the nations are blessed by the descendants of Abraham because they've been introduced to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And in dwelling in the tents, that's a euphemism, that's a way of saying we're going to the place of learning, to learn from the people who worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And once again, those Aramaic translations, those Targums, reveal this expectation of the Gentiles even coming to faith. So look how it says it in the Targum. It says, "The Lord shall beautify the borders of Japheth, and his sons shall be proselyted, and dwell in the schools of Shem." Isn't that an interesting way of phrasing it? So proselyted means what? They're going to come to the faith, right? They're come to believe. And they're going to dwell, as opposed to the tents of Shem, it says the schools of Shem, where they're going to learn how to live, how to be that people. Canaan shall be servant to them. So these descendants of Japheth, that's the prophecy all the way back in Genesis, are going to learn as they live and dwell in the schools of Shem. That word for school is related to the concept of midrash. It's a madrasa. And what are they going to be learning about in these schools? They're going to be learning the Torah, right? They're going to be learning the halakha, the way of life, that Torah that's going to go forth from Zion. They're going to learn God's ways. They're going to dwell side by side in the same tent with the descendants of Shem. So Israel and Jerusalem, those that you look out there and those that you may be afraid of, those that you may think of as your enemies now, those who are attacking you now and making you want to give up, making you want to quit, you're actually going to outlast them. You're going to survive them, and you're going to come out on top so that they come under your protection. They come under even your teaching. Isaiah continues that idea. He's talking about enlarge the place of your tent, stretch out your tabernacle curtains, do not hold back, lengthen your cords, strengthen your stakes, for you will spread out to the right hand and to the left. Your offspring will possess the nations and will resettle the desolate cities. To the right and to the left, to every direction they can go, east, west, north, and south, you're going to increase your territory, and your offspring are going to possess, they're going to receive these nations that are coming to them. They're going to resettle in all of those run-down places, all of those abandoned places where there's no life in them in the moment. The Septuagint puts it like this. Again, I'm going through all of these different renditions, translations, because it just gives insight into how the Jewish people have thought about these passages. It says, spread forth thy tent yet to the right and to the left, for thy seed shall inherit the Gentiles. And this Septuagint was written 200 years before Yeshua was born. And thou shalt make the desolate cities to be inhabited. Thy seed shall inherit. And what's interesting about that is that the seed is singular, which is exactly the point that Paul makes in the book of Galatians, right? He says, now the promises were spoken to Abraham and to his seed. And it doesn't say, and to his seeds, as of many, but as of one, and to your seed, who is the Messiah. Who could have guessed, who could have known that a single letter, whether something is singular or plural, can be a significant point, but Paul does that. And so while seed can be a plural concept, can be describing all the seed, all the descendants, Paul's making the point that the seed, being singular, refers exclusively to Messiah. And when you look back in chapter 53 that we went back to a couple weeks ago, where Isaiah mentioned in verse 12 that he will receive the many as a portion, that the mighty, the great in number, as spoil, he says that in verse 12. That makes sense. Right? He says, spread forth thy tent, yet to the right and the left, for thy seed shall inherit the Gentiles. The Gentiles are a part of the portion, a part of the inheritance of the Messiah. And so the tents of Israel, the tents of Shem, will be expanded to include them. Those that are now called children from the nations. And the children of Israel will grow. And God's people will have a future. They're going to be brought together in the same home and in the same house with the same God. That's the mystery of the gospel, the good news that Paul talks about in the book of Ephesians. He goes on, this current state that they're in of fear and shame, even that is going to get reversed. In verse 4, he says, fear not, for you will not be ashamed, nor cringe, for you will not be disgraced. For you will forget the shame of your youth, and you will remember the reproach of your widowhood no more. So this fear, this shame, this cringing, this disgrace will be gone, and there's no need to even remember it. That's how much of a change there has been. It'll be forgotten because the promise, because the future that God has said He is going to do, that He is preparing, is so much better. And we need to be reminded of that. As much as we can get fearful, as much as we can get concerned or upset about the things going on in the world, which it can get a lot worse than it is now. We need to understand that the future that he is preparing is a lot better. Even the equivalent, it describes the woman as a widow. Even the equivalent of the death of a husband, for which it says she had provided no children. It's a lot like the woman that Yeshua was challenged with, who married one brother of 7, and she ended up being married to all of them. Y'all remember that? And they were questioning the whole concept of the resurrection through that scenario. But even what could be perceived as or described as or talked about as shame like that is going to be gone. Verse 5, he says, "For your Maker is your husband. ADONAI Tzavaot, that is his name. The Holy One of Israel is your Redeemer, and he will be called God of all the earth." Not just the strip of the Promised Land, but it's expanding to include everything. He's always been God of all the earth, right? He's always God of all the earth. But in that future, it's going to be in place and established. It's through the work of that faithful servant. It's the one from chapter 53, the Messiah, that our relationship with our Maker is rightly restored and expanded. Because Messiah has made the many righteous. And even our shalom, even our peace is purchased. Our covenant is rightly restored. When you look at this passage, the covenant, the Torah that was given at Mount Sinai functions, acts like a ketubah, a marriage covenant. It outlines those terms. It outlines the expectations of the parties involved in the marriage. For the woman, the bride, the ketubah is a guarantee that she's going to be taken care of, that she has a secure future with the groom. And the bride, is restored to her Maker, the one to whom she was first promised, the one that he has restored like Hosea did for Gomer. The suffering servant paid the price for her redemption, and the Messiah, son of David, will come as the bridegroom. This wedding feast, the Maker is your husband. The wedding feast has taken place, as John tells about in Revelation 19. He says, "Then I heard something like the voice of a great multitude, like the roar of rushing waters, or like the rumbling of powerful thunder, saying, Hallelujah, for ADONAI Elohai Tzavaot reigns." And I don't believe it's an accident that he uses the ADONAI Tzavaot, the Lord of hosts. That's what he just mentioned back in Isaiah. The Lord of heaven's armies. This is the direction of where it's been going all along, that Israel would have a husband, that the husband is her Maker, that the Holy One of Israel, when that comes to pass, is going to be on the throne. Verse 7 says, "Let us rejoice and be glad and give glory to him, for the wedding of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. And she was given fine linen to wear, bright and clean, for the fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints, of the Kedoshim." The wedding of the Lamb has come. The Messiah, the Memra, the Word, the radiance of his glory and the imprint of his being, the visible image of the invisible God. As Yeshua himself said, "When you have seen me, when you've seen Messiah Yeshua, you have seen the Father." It's not talking about two different husbands. There is one husband. There's one. And the bride has made herself ready. She hasn't earned that place. She hasn't done something to deserve it, but she is ready because she is believed. She is ready because she is trusted by faith, believing in those promises, believing in that expectation, that provision of God fulfilled in Messiah. Again, there are many that are made righteous. Their status has been changed from being unrighteous to being righteous. by the work of the servant for his bride. She was made ready by the work and by the blood of the Lamb. That's how Paul talks about it in Ephesians. Most of the time we look at this passage about what it says to the husbands, but look at what it says about Messiah. It says, "Husbands, love your wives just as Messiah also loved his community and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, having cleansed her by the immersion in the word." Messiah did this so that he might present to himself his glorious community, not having stain or wrinkle or any such thing, but in order that she might be holy and blameless. It's getting harder and harder to not see these statements in light of Isaiah 53 and Isaiah 54, where the many are made righteous, where Messiah intends to make his bride holy, to sanctify her by the work of the Word, having cleansed her by immersion in the Word, by the work of the Word, the living and the written. And again, it's hard not to wonder or consider whether Paul is including that concept that we see in the Aramaic, the idea of the memra, the word. But what's interesting here is that the word that Paul uses is not the usual one that we think of. It's not the word logos. It's this one. It's rhema. That which is or has been uttered by the living voice, the spoken word. Any sound produced by the voice and having a definite meaning, speech or discourse. The first time that this word is used in the Greek translation in the Septuagint also goes back to Genesis 15. The first time that Abraham believed God is credited to him as righteousness. It says, "After these things, the word of ADONAI came to Abram in a vision, saying, 'Do not fear, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward.'" Through Messiah, speaking over his bride, speaking blessing, speaking his word, speaking the Torah, the bride is made holy and reflects his glory, and is the one that is wearing fine linen, bright and clean, the garments of the bride, but also the garments even of a priest. That's how those things are described. Because even though we all are like sheep who have gone astray, even though our sins are like scarlet, Isaiah even says that they will be made white as snow when we hear his call to return to him. That's verse 6. He says, "For ADONAI has called you back." Even though you've wandered away, even though your clothing is stained, even though you feel like you've lost everything, ADONAI has called you back like a wife deserted and grieved in spirit, like a wife of one's youth that is rejected, says your God. It says, "For a brief moment I deserted you, but I will regather you with a great compassion." What you're experiencing now, the hardship that you're going through now, that's causing you to give up or lose hope, those are brief in comparison. They are brief. Through Messiah, he is working in them. In spite of all their feelings of judgment, feelings of rejection, they need to hear clearly that God has not abandoned them. Israel may have been scattered, they may have been sown off into the nations, but there is this promise: I'm going to regather you with great compassion. Yes, he judges them. Yes, he brings Babylon upon them, but he still very much loves them. He says in verse 8, "In a surge of anger I hid my face from you a moment. But with everlasting kindness I will have compassion on you," says ADONAI, your Redeemer. His anger lasts a moment. How long does his kindness last? Everlasting. It's not going to end. For this is like the waters of Noah to me. For as I swore that the waters of Noah should no more cover the earth, so I have sworn that I will not be angry with you, nor will I rebuke you. He is and continues to be Israel's Redeemer. That didn't end just with Moses. That didn't end with the Exodus. He is Israel's Redeemer. He restores them out of captivity. And even though this cycle has happened a couple of times of judgment, as Hebrews talks about, no discipline feels pleasant at the time, but painful. But he says later it will yield a harvest of righteousness. That promise in verse 9. The promise of Noah is still being kept, isn't it? He made that promise a long time ago, and he is still keeping it to this day. And so, since that promise has been kept and will be kept, so will God's promise of this return to the land, this regathering, this full restoration of God's people in the kingdom of God. Again, those Aramaic translations again reveal this Jewish thought about the promises in the past to Noah and the ones that are going to be fulfilled in the future, and who is the one that's making these promises. You might recognize it, or recognize him. He says, "This shall be before me as the days of Noah, when I swore by my word," by that memra. And who is that? That's really a picture of Messiah. It's a picture of Yeshua. "When I swore by my word that the waters of the deluge which were in the days of Noah shall no more pass over the earth, thus I swear by my word that my anger shall not be hurled upon thee, neither will I reprove thee." So he made a promise to Noah in the Memra, and he is keeping that promise. He's made another promise. His anger is not going to be the longest. It's not going to be hurled upon thee without any mercy. We still enjoy the benefits of the first one, and our lives should be able to go on and continue without fear of a worldwide flood today. And if the Father continues to keep that promise, he will fulfill his future promises as well. And so our lives can continue with hope and with expectation, though through the promise given to and through the Word, the Messiah. We find out, we learn, something that Yeshua himself talked about and scriptures talk about, that mercy triumphs over judgment. His love and his grace will be on display. This is verse 10. It says, "Though the mountains depart and the hills be shaken, my love will not depart from you, nor will my covenant of shalom, my covenant of peace, be shaken, says ADONAI, who has compassion on you." The Jewish people, in the near future of Isaiah's day, must not allow themselves to fall into despair. And the same, has to be true for those that came out of terrible events, terrible times like after World War II. And the same has to be true for what has happened and is probably going to happen in some form or fashion in the days ahead. But we need to understand and know that God has not and will not abandon his people, no matter the circumstances or how it may seem or how it may feel. With all the world powers, with all of the kingdoms, that's what the mountains symbolize in Isaiah. All those mountains, all those kingdoms that are giving you trouble, what's happening to them? They're going to depart. They're going to rise and fall. They're going to be shaken. And all the various other smaller powers that feel threatened or whatever else, all these power imbalances. But the one thing that won't be shaken, no nation is going to survive forever that is being used, that is coming against his people. What will not be shaken, what won't pass away, what won't be lost is his covenant of shalom, his covenant of peace that's established by the chastisement, by the suffering servant back in chapter 53. He was pierced because of our transgressions, crushed because of our iniquities. The chastisement of our shalom was upon him. And by his stripes we are healed. Our shalom, our peace, that covenant of peace was secured by the servant. So there is a future for God's people. What is destroyed will be rebuilt. The lives that were lost will be restored. And the rebuild and the restoration is going to be even more beautiful than it was before. When Isaiah describes it, he says, afflicted one, storm-tossed and unconsoled, behold, I set your stones in antimony. I don't know how to pronounce that word. Lay your foundations with sapphires, with various types of jewels. Make your pinnacles of rubies, your gates of crystal, and your walls of precious stones. Right? All of these things that they would put in jewelry and in rings and in think as valuable in trade, those are going to be what the place is built from. It's when you read in the scriptures, a precious cornerstone has been laid in Zion. A precious cornerstone. And all of the other living stones, and living stones are the ones that kind of have that fire within them. The kind that glimmer, that shine, that refract light, that reflect light, that reflect the glory that is shine upon them. These are the kind of stones that are being built into a glorious and new city, even a new temple. And again, that's very similar. That's what is being drawn from in the book of Revelation in a couple of different places. But one place is Revelation 21. Notice how this parallels. The material of the city's wall was jasper, while the city was pure gold, clear as glass. And the foundations of the city wall were decorated with every kind of precious stone. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third chalcedony, and the fourth emerald. All right, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth carnelian, the seventh yellow topaz, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th, anybody want to work on that one? Chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, and the 12th amethyst. The stones that he's referring to, those are, how many of them are there? There's 12. How many tribes are there? 12. These are like the stones that would appear on the breastplate of the high priest. And the 12 gates were 12 pearls, and each of the gates was from a single pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold, transparent as glass. Now, I've heard a lot of people describe Jerusalem as a beautiful city, and that the temple was a bright, shining white, and that it was glorious in Isaiah's day, or they think it's beautiful even today. Do you think it's going to be that pretty? Or is it that pretty right now? No, it's not that pretty. The shining city on a hill, what pales, what we see today pales in comparison to the beauty that God has in store for the future kingdom of God. This new Jerusalem, the place in his Father's house that Messiah is going to prepare for us. The place where his throne and his presence reside. He says in verse 2, he says, I also saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. There are so many concepts that connect. And again, this carries Isaiah's hope from verse 5. Your maker is your husband. ADONAI Tzavaot is his name. The Holy One of Israel is your Redeemer, and he will be called God of all the earth. And so the one that was barren and had not given birth, whose husband had has died or abandoned her, felt that her life was over. Now she has a husband and children, and the father will be greatly involved in the lives of the children. He says in verse 13, he says, all your children will be taught by Adonai. Your children will have great shalom. Where will they be taught? In the school of Shem, in the tents of Shem, right? That's a way of saying the places of learning. They're going to be taught by the Father. Just like Jacob, when he remained with the tents in the place of learning, he learned from Isaac, but also Abraham. So our Creator, our Father, shall teach the now abundant children that are all dwelling together. He will ensure they know His Torah. They'll ensure that He knows His narrow path of righteousness and peace. And when you look at this passage in the Aramaic, it says, and all thy children shall learn the law, the Torah of the Lord, and great shall be the peace of thy children. You know, it's when the love of many is as lawlessness increases, what happens to the love? The love of many grows cold, right? So that's as lawlessness increases, love decreases. So as keeping of the Torah increases, what should be the next parallel? So does our love also increase. Right? The righteousness that the servant has provided, that satisfied God's holiness in 53, that justice is the foundation. Verse 14, as the children are learning, and they're learning the Torah of God, and there'll be this great peace. It says in chapter 50, verse 14, he says, in righteousness you will be established, or another translation says, and you will be established on a foundation of righteousness. Now this is, again, talking about making things firm, stable, they're fixed, they are sure. And the first time that word in this one is used is in Genesis 41:32. When Joseph and Pharaoh's dream, when Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream, where he has the dream of the 7 ears of corn or the 7 fat cows, right? Where he has the 7th dream of the abundance and famine. And Joseph tells him, this is because you have had this dream twice. That means the matter was determined, it was absolute, it was fixed and sure. That's what this will be. In righteousness you will be established. And this firm establishment is a lot like God's throne, where he says, righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Loving kindness and truth go before you. This established righteousness from God in his people, it has benefits that we should look forward to, that so contrasts our life today. He said, in righteousness you will be established. You will be far from oppression, for you will not fear, and from terror, for it will not come near you. Behold, anyone fiercely attacking is not from me. Whoever stirs up strife with you will fall because of you. So fear and oppression, this terror, people are coming against them, causing them to hide, causing behind the walls and the gates, causing them to run off into the wilderness to hide. That kind of life is over in the Messianic era. The nations, whether they be a world power like Assyria, whether they be Babylon, in how they attacked, how they treated and destroyed the people, how they went even far beyond the mandate of discipline. They were judged for how they treated Israel. But Israel's got to understand, as we must in our day, that these nations are not the power. These enemies do not rule. He does. Right? He says, behold, I created the smith who blows the fire of coals and produces a weapon for its work. I created the destroyer to ruin. All those nations like Assyria and Babylon, the kings and rulers that were raised up, he did that. But those great and powerful nations, even a nation like the United States, are merely tools in the Father's hand that fulfills his purposes. But none of our purposes, none of the purposes of the nations, will have victory over his people. They're not going to last. They will not endure, but his people will. Y'all should know this verse. We hear it quoted a lot. No weapon formed against you will prosper, and you will condemn every tongue that rises against you in judgment. This is the heritage of ADONAI's servants. Their vindication is from me. It is a declaration of ADONAI. So no weapon, no nation that is a tool in his hand is going to prosper or prevail against his people. No weapon that even the nations wield, whether it's in the hand, whether they drive it on the ground, or whether it flies through the air, are going to survive and prosper against his people. No nation then or today that comes against Israel and God's people will succeed and endure. They may see victory for a period and a time, but it's short in comparison. Assyria, destroyed the northern kingdom, but the Jewish people are still here, aren't they? And Assyria is not. Babylon destroyed the southern kingdom. Where is Babylon? It's gone. The Jewish people are still here. And this pattern holds true throughout history in every attempt that's been made to wipe them out. So all this talk that, even when you hear theologians and things that talk today about how, well, this version of Israel, what started in 1948, is not significant. It doesn't have any prophetic significance to it. This promise is not going to change, whether that is right or not. And it's not, but this promise is going to be true. Even their defeat is only temporary, and no nation, even if they experience a momentary victory, is going to survive coming against Israel, because Israel is the nation that is in the kingdom. And you're either part of Israel and the kingdom of Messiah, or your nation is under his authority and rule. So that includes Hamas, that includes Hezbollah, that includes Iran, that includes the United States. And it's not just militarily that it's talking about, no weapon, but any person or nation, if you notice it, that condemns every tongue, he says. So those that speak evil or accuse or rise up against Israel and God's people, are they going to prosper? Even just with their words? No. You think about what's happening in the world courts, the arrest warrants and things that are being sent out, like coming out of South Africa, or you look at the college students, like our own government, like it just did. Was it yesterday or Friday or Saturday? Those that commit this kind of lashon hara, this evil speech against them, will be condemned. And we who are grafted in, who are made heirs within the covenants of promise, that we're protected as well, because we have come to live in the tents of Shem. And it's not because of how good or perfect the Jewish people are. It's not how good or perfect we who believe in Messiah are, but because this is the promise of God, and it's his word that's at stake. The inheritance that he has prepared. This world is not our home. He is going to prepare a place for us, a future for us. What we experience now is not going to define our future in his kingdom. And so because that is true, because that is real, because that is what we believe and what we hold on to hope and continue to trust in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who made the promise. And he brings the promise to come to pass through the work of Messiah. And by believing, by trusting, by holding on to hope, that's how we as the bride are being made ready. Because we believe and trust in the one to come, Messiah, our Yeshua, our salvation. Does that make sense? We're going to see a lot of things in this world in the days ahead, but we cannot lose hope in his promise.